Daniel Terry Williams, 22 years, was likely smothered to death a year ago, according to the state's chief medical examiner, and there was evidence on his body that corroborate what witnesses have said was his kidnapping and torture over a period of several days inside Staton Correctional Facility. A DNA rape kit revealed 3 attackers, according to Williams's family. They believe he was held by other inmates over 2 to 3 days. Dr. Edward Reedy, chief medical examiner for the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences, conducted the autopsy, and his report includes details of Mr. Williams' tragic last few days. There is evidence of ligature restraint on the decedent's ankles and contusions on various locations that are also suggestive of manual restraint, Mr. Reedy wrote in the report, also noting there were multiple abrasions and contusions in varying states of healing, and diffuse abrasions and contusions on his upper extremities that may be defensive in nature. The cause of death was probable asphyxia due to smothering. Injuries of the decedent's face are highly suggestive of his face being pressed into a soft object. The autopsy from the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences lists the manner of death as homicide. Daniel was found unconscious on the bunk of another inmate the family believes is responsible for this death on October 22nd. An I-team investigation found that inmate had a history of sexual violence, yet was housed in an open dorm area. Daniel was transferred to Jackson Hospital and placed on life support before dying in hospice care at Kilby Correctional Infirmary 2 weeks later. With all this overwhelming evidence, why did the grand jury not return an indictment? Will there be justice for Daniel? The killing of Daniel Williams gained national attention. Williams was 22 years old, serving a 1-year sentence on drug charges, dying the day he was to be released. Last Facebook message. Daniel had just been transferred into this prison, and his last Facebook read, "How everybody doing? I ain't got too much longer left, pray for me. I'm coming home better. Then I was before drug-free. It's been a crazy ride. 3 different prisons now. It's almost over." Daniel Terry Williams, 22, wrote on October 15, about 1 week before his family says he was brutally attacked by a prison gang on October 19. Facebook. Warden's lies. Taylor Bostick, Williams' stepmother, said the warden at Staton told her over the phone that Williams had overdosed on drugs. When she and her husband, Terry Williams, Daniel's father, went to visit him at a hospital after the alleged overdose, they could not believe what they saw. "He was black and blue from head to toe," Bostick said. "He had restraint marks on his wrists. He had indents almost in his head from being beaten." Terry Williams noted multiple injuries on his son at the hospital. "It looked like mop handles across his head, bruising everywhere. It's something parents shouldn't see," said Williams. The bruising on the inside of his legs led the hospital staff to believe he had been sexually assaulted too. Terry Williams alleged, citing what he has heard from other inmates at the facility, that Daniel had been tied up and beaten on October 19, 3 days before another inmate got him help on October 22nd. Daniel was brain dead and transported to a hospital, where his family ultimately decided to take him off life support. He was apparently transported to Kilby Correctional Facility 3 days after being taken off life support, where he was pronounced dead on November 9, his parents alleged, the day he was supposed to be released. "I'm speechless, really," said Terry Williams, his father, after learning no indictments were handed down by an Elmore County grand jury in the homicide. "I think about it all the time," said Williams, wiping away tears. Prior to his son's death, he had lost his mother. The autopsy from the Alabama Department of Forensic Sciences lists the manner of death as homicide and the cause of death as probable asphyxia due to smothering. Injuries of the decedent's face are highly suggestive of his face being pressed into a soft object. The report notes evidence of ligature restraint on the inmate, meaning he was tied up. It also reports multiple abrasions and contusions in varying states of healing. A longtime prison researcher with Alabama Appleseed was queried about how an inmate could be held by other inmates, tortured and raped for 2 to 3 days, and no one intervened. Where were the guards? Great question. In a secure prison, to have someone kidnapped and moved to a dorm where he's not supposed to be for a period of days, it's unconscionable. There should have been officers to see that and cameras, remarked researcher Eddie Burkhalter. He says he is surprised the Elmore County grand jury, which met last month, returned no indictments. Daniel's death and the inability to hold anyone accountable is more evidence why more eyes need to be on this crisis, said Burkhalter. His organization tracked 325 deaths last year in the state prisons. They've gotten worse across the board, said Burkhalter. No one accountable for his brutal gang rape, torture, and murder? He was a father of 2. Despite witnesses who saw Mr. Williams being held against his will in a secure prison staffed with officers, and despite clear medical evidence pointing to homicide and a suspect identified, that suspect has not been charged in Mr. Williams's death. To date, no one has been criminally charged in connection with his death. In a prison system where frequent violent deaths are common, the homicide of Mr. Williams stood out for a number of reasons. He was serving a short sentence for a minor crime. He was scheduled for release within days. His torture over a prolonged period went undetected for days, and his assailant had a long record of institutional violence that went unaddressed. And now it appears no one will be held accountable for this young man's suffering and death. What's scary is the suspected perpetrator was serving a 20-year sentence for sodomy, assault, and escape. He has a record dating back to 2015 across multiple prisons, nearly killed another inmate by stabbing him to death, yet still had a violence assessment score of 0 and is still due to be released from prison in like 10 years. The 38-year-old suspect in this kidnapping, rape, and torture was involved in 9 instances of sex assault, rape, and stabbing since 2017 in ADOC while incarcerated. There is no documentation that he was placed in segregation for any of these assaults. There was no disciplinary action by ADOC. His classification summary showed a 5-year clear record of institutional violence, which resulted in a perfect score of 0 in risk assessment conducted in October, and a total score low enough for him to be placed in medium security in an open bay dorm. The psych associate signed off on this, and the warden signed off on this, Mrs. Crowder told committee members. 9 days later, 22-year-old Daniel Williams was found, according to ADOC, unresponsive on this inmate's assigned bed. A DOC didn't classify the assault as a crime or levy a disciplinary charge, but instead simply wrote the matter up as an enemies report, which are supposed to be used to keep disputing incarcerated people from one another. Insufficient probable cause to issue an indictment. The Alabama Department of Corrections, ADOC Law Enforcement Services Division, completed its investigation and forwarded those findings in July to the Elmore County District Attorney's Office for presentation of a criminal case to the grand jury, an ADOC spokeswoman told Appleseed. The case involving the death of Daniel Williams was investigated by the I&I Division of DOC, wrote 19th Judicial Circuit District Attorney C.J. Robinson in a response to Appleseed last week. He referred to ADOC's Law Enforcement Services Division as I&I, which is the abbreviation of the division's former name, the Investigations and Intelligence Division. The completed case file was submitted to the 19th Judicial Circuit DA's office several weeks ago and presented to the first available grand jury in Elmore County, October 2024. After hearing the details of the investigation, the grand jury determined there was insufficient probable cause to issue an indictment, Mr. Robinson said. In Mr. Williams' case, the grand jury had the opportunity to hear from investigators and review any video footage before being presented with 3 possible offenses to indict on: murder, manslaughter, or criminally negligent homicide, Mr. Robinson told Appleseed. They took a long amount of time to hear the evidence and for their deliberations, he said. But ultimately, they failed to receive 12 votes to indict. Mr. Robinson also shared that if additional evidence or witnesses surface that might change the grand jury vote, he would consider re-presenting the case, which is something he has done in the past.